I have been doing a survey of the Bible, and we've been in the New Testament, and we're now up to 2nd John. We're looking at title, author, date, historical background, and so forth. The title really should be seen as going back to the author, which is John himself. And we discussed this under our discussion of 1st John. The same is true of the author, which we understand to be John the Apostle. And again, we gave the reasons for that in our video on 1st John. And the same with the date. The date is taken up or was taken up under our study in 1st John. So we come to the historical background. Notice the background to the writing of 2nd John is quite clear. False teachers were traveling around to the various churches in Asia Minor, carrying their false doctrine with them. John therefore warns the church to which he is writing to refuse any hospitality to these teachers in order that the church in no wise contribute to this divisive work. And so what we have here is those that were carrying false doctrine around, and John's warning the church against that. Notice concerning the identification of the recipients of the epistle, the words "the elect lady" and her children have caused some difficulty. There are two basic interpretations which are debated. The first one understands these words to refer to an elect lady who is a friend of John's. The opposing view feels that John is writing to a local church in Asia Minor. For those who understand John to be writing to a select lady, there are several arguments advanced in support of this view. First of all, this interpretation, according to its proponents, fits best with literal hermeneutics or interpretation, whereas the opposing view leads to a metaphorical understanding of the passage. Secondly, it is argued that the context requires one to think of an individual as the recipient of the epistle. This is illustrated by the singular you in verses 4 and 5. Next, the details of the epistle can fit with this view. The lady then probably, according to this view, had a sister, presumably deceased, who had children living in Ephesus. It seems that the children of the elect lady visited their cousins at Ephesus, and John met with them and learned of their walk in the truth. John therefore writes their mother to tell her of his joy over the behavior of her children, to warn her about receiving false teachers, and to send greetings from the sister's children. This view, however, is hard to hold when a closer consideration is given to the book. There is sufficient evidence that John is writing to an elect local church and not to an individual lady. This may be summarized, this conclusion as follows. First, the fact that the lady was universally loved by all Christians who knew the truth suggests an assembly rather than one individual. And then also, she is not mentioned by name, and neither are her children or nephews. This stands in sharp contrast to the personal letter of 3rd John, where individual names are mentioned. Furthermore, The extended use of the second person plural throughout the epistle suggests a group, and again stands in marked contrast to 3 John, where the singular is used throughout. Furthermore, the commandment in verse 5 fits much better with a local church than with an individual lady. And finally, the reference to the church by personification is not strictly foreign to the New Testament. For example, in 1 Peter 5:13, Peter seems to refer to the church in Babylon by the same idea as an elect lady or as a lady. Also, Paul refers to the church as the bride of Christ in Ephesians 5:29. And even John himself refers to the church in Revelation 21:9 as the bride, the Lamb's wife. In studying the arguments, then, it seems most likely to me that John is therefore writing to a local church and its believers and not to an individual lady. With such an understanding of the background, the warning in the epistle concerning false teachers, then, is written to a local assembly, which is urged not to receive such persons into their midst. The reference in verse 13 would then refer to a sister church and to its members. As to the purpose of the book, the main purpose for writing the epistle is to warn the church against any compromising and traveling false teachers who were spreading error concerning the person of Christ. John writes, "Whosoever transgresses and abides not in the doctrine of Christ has not God. He that abides in the doctrine of Christ, he has both the Father and the Son. If there come any unto you, and this one bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. For he that bids him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds." So with that background, the main argument or contents of the book, then, we could say as follows. The theme, excuse me, of the book of 2 John is a warning against receiving false teachers. The structure of the letter seems to be that of an introduction, verses 1 to 3, the body, verses 4 to 11, and the conclusion, verses 12 to 13. In the introduction, John introduces the recipient of the letter and gives his basic epistolary greeting in 1 to 3. Following this, the body of the epistle is taken up, in which John begins by commending these believers for walking in the truth, verse 4. He then reminds them of the great commandment to love one another, as they had been instructed to do so from the beginning, verses 5 and 6, and how important that is, that believers truly seek to love one another. After this commendation and challenge, the apostle warns these believers then of the peril of false teachers, which is facing them at this point. This is in verses 7 to 11. The false doctrine of these deceivers is announced, followed by the exhortation to the believers to watch themselves and to be careful not to receive the false teachers into their homes, verses 9 and 10. To do so, then, is to become a partaker in the evil deeds of these people. John therefore warns in this way: "Whosoever transgresses and abides not in the doctrine of Christ has not God." He that abides in the doctrine of Christ, he is both the Father and the Son. So if there come any unto you, and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. Again, for he that bids him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds. Verses 9 and 11. John then concludes his letter with the expressed hope of seeing them personally and with a greeting from the believer's sister church. So again, as we look at the book, after the introduction in verses 1 to 3, he talks about the path that the believers should take. They should walk in truth and in love, verses 4 to 6. And then he talks about the peril that's facing them, where he is telling them basically how they are to relate to this peril of false teachers and the attitude that they should have toward them. That is, not to bring them in and let them spread their false doctrine. And this is then brought to a conclusion in verses 12 and 13. So it's a short book, and it's basically a book warning the church about the false teachers that would be coming in and disturbing the church.